Welcome to the Gals Guide to the Galaxy podcast, where a group of gals gather for you one cool thing around our topic of the month. Is it ancient history? Is it breaking news? Is it safe for work? Well, that's up to each gal. All we know is that...
Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night.
Welcome back. I'm Leah, and I'm joined by Bonnie and Katie and Eden, and we are talking about our one cool Indigenous gal. So, Bonnie already talked about Elizabeth Wanamaker Petrovich, and Eden talked about Shasheen Littlefeather, and Katie talked about Mary Gold Ross. But before we dive back in, let's get to know something random about our gal pals. So my question to you all is, what is something that non-Indigenous people can learn from Indigenous people?
Ooh, pick me!
Yes!
Me!
Eden, your hand is up.
Okay, so I'm a Gen Xer.
Yes.
Child of the 70s and 80s.
Same. Yes.
And so that was really when the conservation movement was getting underway and people were taking care of the earth.
Mm-hmm.
And that
crying Indian.
Yeah, and the crying, not actually Native American,
right,
but actually Italian
right,
guy.
Exactly, yes,
crying
very true.
about the litter.
Right.
Anyway, so... because we were so into recycling and conservation and taking care of the land and all of this, I, as a child, never understood why we didn't ask why the non-Indigenous people, why we didn't ask the Indigenous people, okay, you guys are the best people
to protect the land.
On how to live on the land without destroying the land while you grow things and do your livelihood.
Since white people got here, that seems like the opposite of what they've been doing. So maybe.
So I remember being young and thinking, why is nobody asking the Native Americans? You know, how do we conserve, and what's the best way to keep the soil good, and all this. Yeah. And of course, it wasn't until I was older and realized just how terribly this country has treated Indigenous Americans.
It's kind of like, oh, you would like me to help?
Yes. You know, and then I was very sad because I'm thinking,
opportunity lost.
This is an opportunity lost. It's, the answer is so simple, and yet clearly it's not.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
So that would be mine. Conservation, protecting the earth,
honing in with nature.
Exactly.
I dig it.
Exactly.
That would be fantastic. What about you, ladies? What is something?
I was thinking a very similar thing, like a balance with nature. I think goes hand in hand with a lot of like Taoist stuff, where the yin and the yang come from. It's having a very balance with nature.
Right.
A kind of a thing.
Yeah, exactly. I dig it. Katie's,
those are really good answers.
Katie's got her confused, not confused face. Katie's got her, oh, damn it face. Yes.
Oh, man. I would say, I know it hasn't always been successful, and I know our government has done atrocious things to Native Americans. But I would hope that we could, be inspired by them to fight back. Inspired by Native Americans to say that's not right, and to fight back on their behalf, to join them, but to also just say something, because I feel like there's a lot of political apathy, and there's a lot of fucked up shit going on right now that needs called out. So I think
that needs allies as well as heroes,
right? Being inspired to be an ally, to be a hero.
Yeah.
That'd be cool.
Absolutely. For me, I totally go to folktales. I love me good Indigenous folktale. I love the idea of not only folktales, but origin stories.
Yes.
I love seeing, because so many of Indigenous storylines are about how the world was birthed, and it's usually a matriarchal mother myth. but also just little things of how to get along with others are very beautiful stories. There's the quick myth about there are two wolves.
Oh yes,
the two wolves story where one of them is mean and and kills everything it sees, and another one is soft and gentle, and it's how do you know which wolf you are, and it's the one you feed. So if you feed the evil one or if you feed the good one, that's the one you become. And it's like, I love those kind of tales. And it feels like the farther back in history you go, that's where you get those stories.
Yes.
You got to go to the original source of the indigenous people of that land. And I love all of them because they kind of weave together where they're the same but different.
Yes.
But if you put them all together, like, you feel like you unlock the secrets of the universe. So it's pretty cool.
Kinda yeah.
So I love me a good folktale at any point, and that has nothing to do with the lady that I am covering. Just wanted to keep you on your toes, y'all. So my Indigenous gal is a wonderful example that women can be more than one thing. I love a gal who does a lot of different things, but not without a whole bunch of struggle along with it as well. So I'm going to tell you about Zitkála-Šá. She was a writer, she was a political activist, she was a teacher, she was an intellectual, and she was a musician. She is known for creating the first Native American opera.
Nice.
Right? Exactly. Okay. So she was born on the Yankton Sioux Reservation that is now commonly known as South Dakota. Her name, Zitkála-Šá, means red bird, and she gave it to herself. She was born around 1876, so we're talking a whiles back. She was raised by her mother. Her father abandoned the family, so there is not much to be known about him because he just couldn't be bothered. When Zitkála-Šá was 8 years old, Quaker missionaries came to the reservation and took her and other kids to a boarding school.
Yikes.
Yeah, I'm going to be talking about the terrible Indian boarding schools.
The Quakers are supposed to be the nice ones.
They are. Do you know where they took them to in the boarding school? Oh, Wabash, Indiana. So the school was called White's Indiana Manual Labor Institute. They didn't even hide the name.
Manual labor.
Manual labor. And white in it as well. Oh, yeah.
But
really
didn't the Quakers think like the harder you worked, the closer you got to God?
Yes.
So they were saving those children?
Yes. They really thought they were doing the Lord's work.
It's supposed to be for equality.
Yeah, well, not so much.
Quakers.
The students were pulled away from their culture, their heritage. They were given new names. So Zitkála-Šá's name that she was given was Gertrude Simmons. So you might see references to a Gertrude Simmons. She didn't choose that name. We know about her time and her thoughts about the Institute because she wrote about them. She was very conflicted because at the school, she learned how to read and write. So yay, she can tell her story. She also learned how to play the violin. The violin will come in handy with a couple of opportunities. But she was forced to cut her hair and wear a uniform and cut ties to her heritage and forced to Christian prayer constantly. So she was there for 3 years before she returned home to the reservation. But when she came back, it was really difficult for her. She was kind of caught between two worlds. She could now read and write. She knew a little bit about the outside world. She wasn't really treated, as a member of the tribe so much anymore because she had left and then come back. So she actually decided to give it another 3 years at the boarding school.
The labor camp.
Yes. So she had very mixed thoughts about this, but she went back until she was 15 years old. So she learned to study the piano and the violin. That did give her a job as a music teacher. So it did give her a future. It also won her a scholarship to Earlham College in Richmond, Indiana.
Like Quakers.
Exactly.
Yes.
So glorious Indiana times. And
Good old Earlham College.
Right next to that candle factory.
right. Woo, woo, hoot. But while she was there, she did start to plug in and start writing down Indigenous stories of the people around her. She also was translating stories of her people into Latin and into English so that more people could have access to them. She didn't graduate from Earlham because of money and health issues. So instead, she went to the New England Conservatory of Music. Not a bad, like, trade up, basically.
No, not at all.
And because of that New England Conservatory of Music, she was in the right place at the right time to go to the Paris Exposition in 1900 and to play for the president, William McKinley, at the White House.
Nice.
So she got some nice opportunities out of that. At age 23, so she's only 23 when all this has happened to her. Nobody likes you when you're 23. But she took a job as a music teacher in Pennsylvania. And this wasn't just any teaching job. It was at the flagship Indian boarding school.
Carlisle.
Yes.
Oh.
Yes, it was. So Carlisle was basically the models for all the other Indian schools. To really indoctrinate Native Americans into white society. I don't know why I use quotes on white society, but society. So yeah, the Carlisle Indian Industrial School sent Zitkála-Šá back to the reservation to get more students.
Oh.
Now, when she returned, the reservation was not in good shape. A whole bunch of white settlers were taking over. Poverty was running rampant. And she started writing about her people and she started writing about her life. She did not pull any punches in her writing. And in 1901, she wrote for Harper's Monthly about how a student at Carlisle felt the loss of their identity from the school and how horrible the school was. And she was fired. What? How did they? She continued to write about how horrible the school was. That's how we found out about it. There was a little bit of backlash. People said, oh, you're biting the hand that feeds you. They taught you how to read and write, and now you're using it against them. And she's like, well, but they're horrible. What are you going to do?
But she didn't go to Carlisle.
Right, but she was a teacher there. Yeah. I know, exactly. But you know what? She called him out.
They didn't want called out. Maybe they shouldn't have done it.
Maybe you shouldn't have been a bad person in the first place.
Totally.
Just saying. Exactly.
Yeah.
Didn't
Bad
start
behavior.
none, will be none.
Yes.
Just saying. So she went back to her reservation and she really plugged into her people. She took care of her mother and she collected stories and published a book called Old Indian Legends. She said about her book, quote, I have tried to transplant the native spirit of these tales into English language since Americans in the last few centuries has acquired a new tongue. So you can get her little like sarcastic, like it was our language, but whatevs. She worked as a clerk for the Bureau of Indian Affairs at the office of Standing Rock. So Standing Rock, yeah, exactly. Kind of, brings it a little modern today. She married a military dude who was 1/4 Yankton Dakota. He was raised in the indigenous culture. His name was Captain Raymond Tallis Bonin. He's got 4 names, Bonnie.
There you go.
One of them very similar to yours, Bonin.
Yep.
He was the grandson of a French trader, so that's why determined to stay on the reservation. Soon after they were married, Captain Raymond was stationed on a reservation in Utah, which moved them to Utah. They would stay on that reservation in Utah for 14 years, and they would also have a son as well in that time. So while she was in Utah, though, she met a professor at Brigham Young University, and they collaborated on an opera.
Nice.
So William F. Hansen and Zitkála-Šá completed the Sundance Opera. Sundance? What? Movie people? What's going on? Yes. Not only from the Sundance, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, but also from the Sundance Opera that Zitkála-Šá wrote with William F. Hansen. But this was... performed for the first time in 1913, the Sundance Opera. It was a bridge between her life as a Sioux Native American and also the world of white America as well. It was one of those things to kind of bridge between the two. It was the first opera ever written by a first American Indian, and it incorporated Sioux rituals in it as well.
Nice.
So it would be performed by a mixed race cast. Sometimes it would be performed by an all-white performers because, depends on where the show was.
Yeah.
And how racist the audience was. But the point of it was that Native Americans were being recognized, that you were able to appreciate the music, the dance, the ritual, because they were not being recognized as citizens of the United States. And Zitkála-Šá thought music was one way to start this conversation, and she ended up dedicating the rest of her life to actually trying to do even more of that. So she joined the Society of American Indians to lobby for full American citizenship. She used her voice to criticize the assimilation policy and child abuse that she saw firsthand at the schools. That didn't go over very well in Utah, though, for some odd reason. So her husband was fired.
Yikes.
She was doing what she was doing, you know what I mean, at the lobbying, but her husband was fired. And so they moved to Washington, D.C., which is a very wonderful, calculated move. Zitkála-Šá kept with the organization. She just moved to the Washington, D.C. chapter. She was also the editor for a year for American Indian magazine as well, getting her words out there. She traveled the country speaking for the rights of Indigenous people. She starts to remind me of Susan B. a little bit. She's got that little bit of Susan B. to her. So with great effort, the 1924 Federal Indian Citizenship Act passed. But it was up to each state of what they wanted to do with it. Kind of like the women's suffrage, where it had to be ratified by each of the states. So she and her husband, Captain Raymond, they founded the National Council of American Indians. Their goal was kind of like the suffragettes, to go from state to state to try to get each state to actually put into act the citizenship agreement so that Native Americans could vote and have equal rights. So the goal was, quote, unite the tribes across the United States to gain suffrage for all Indians. She was the president of that organization for 12 years. She also worked with white suffrage groups too, and she was active in the General Federation of Women's Clubs. Yep. Yay! She was all up in those women's clubs. I loved it. Zitkála-Šá unfortunately died before seeing full voting rights for her people. She died in 1938 at the age of 62. So not a super long life, but not a super short life. But 3 months after her death, the opera Sundance was performed in New York. And so it got to a wider audience.
Wow.
And so people were more aware of it and got to see it. She is also buried at Arlington National Cemetery.
Cool.
Because her husband was a captain and was also in World War II. So, wait, World War II? No, can't be World War II. World War I. Yes. I'm like looking at my math and I'm like, wait a second, that's not right. But on her tombstone, it reads Gertrude Simmons Bonin / Zitkála-Šá of the Sioux Indians. So she was even kind of in two worlds on her tombstone as well. So even though it was a name she did not choose for herself, it looks like she still acknowledged that it was. So it wouldn't be until 1964 that the Voting Rights Act for Native Americans was finally a right to vote in every state. And that is because of the Civil Rights Amendment.
Yes.
What was the year?
1964. So the civil rights...
What?
I know. So even though 1924, the Federal Indian Citizen Act passed, not all the states would do jack or shit.
Yes.
So not until 64 with the civil rights, where it was, screw it, this is not state by state, were Native Americans allowed to vote in every state. However... It was not easy. It was the same thing that African Americans went through with basically, can you pass this literacy test? Yeah. Or can you name all the presidents alphabetically? Or, you know, it was still like just absolutely terrible, terrible crap. And even after World War I and World War II, when you had being sent over to war coming back that they couldn't vote. And there was even groups of the Navajo code talkers who got in uniform and went to the polling place and were denied their ability to vote. Yeah. And they're like, we served our country. Yeah. Why can't we vote? So it was one of those absolute, terrible embarrassment things. But I did have this. This is according to a Washington Post article from 2020 about voting rights. So it says many laws and policies said that Native Americans weren't citizens because they were subjects or wards of the government. That was the loophole that they were trying to say. In Minnesota, the state constitution had a cultural purity test that prohibited Native Americans from voting unless they adopted the language, customs, and habits of civilization.
Oh, my God.
If that's not insult to injury.
Oh, my gosh.
So even with the 14th and 15th Amendment to the Constitution that would grant citizenship and rights to vote for African Americans, they interpreted those laws exclusively to African Americans and not to Native Americans because they were subjects and wards.
Because I think the U.S. government continued to interact with native tribes as sovereign entities until like 1871.
Right. Yes.
And so that would have been after
1855. Yes, there was the treaty.
Yes.
Right.
So that's terrible.
Isn't it though? It's so utterly horrible, but I wanted to bring it up because when we know better, we do better.
Absolutely.
And it's things like this that we aren't necessarily like taught in school. But it's one of those things where voting rights are so important, and it's one way to, to hurt a people. But at the same time, we're talking about boarding schools and indoctrination of, erase all of your heritage, erase your language. It's just absolutely, it's terrible. And, we just have to realize, what, we need to fix this and we need to do better. And also realize that not many Native Americans will go vote because of the shit that they've had to deal with forever. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, cool, I get to vote now? Well, screw y'all. You know what I mean? Yeah. You've done everything from poll taxes to literacy tests to telling me that I'm a subject or a ward of the government, and then I don't get clean water. What the hell? So I will put a link in the show notes. There's actually even more on voting rights for Native Americans and the struggle to even get through, which was absolutely horrible. It's a Washington Post article, so I will totally put that in the notes. So in other words, Zitkála-Šá started a fight that did not end in her lifetime. It did not end for many decades past her lifetime. But she decided to first use music and then use policy, like a glorious little suffragette, to try and get the votes right. So,
it's interesting because, as U.S. citizens of the 20th and now 21st century, we're used to thinking, okay, this amendment gave us this and that amendment gave us that. And you think, okay, so the 14th Amendment was supposedly made anybody born on American soil a citizen. That's how Black people became U.S. citizens. But somehow that didn't quite extend to the Native Americans.
And women.
Right. And then, okay, so you have the 15th Amendment that lets, Black men vote. But if you're in the South, you got to wait a whole 100 years for the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act to pass.
Right.
And then, we've got the 19th Amendment, and where the women can now vote.
Right.
But that's really only the white chicks.
Right, exactly.
It's not the Black chicks. It's not the indigenous chicks.
It's not a clear across the board for everybody.
And then, and then it's like the late 70s before indigenous people could fully practice their religious ceremonies the way they wanted to.
Right.
So that's what the First Amendment, freedom of religion.
Right, exactly.
And you can't do
but they didn't apply, and it's like, what? How
Yeah.
insult to injury is this over and over again?
Yeah, it's like the U.S. is the most wishy-washy country, historically speaking.
Moody little teenagers.
Yeah. How hormonal.
Uh-huh, exactly. And
a
wait,
whole
no,
bunch
that's not
of
what I meant.
except
Yes.
Well, I don't know.
everyone's equal except
Exactly.
Except for the group that I hate this particular month.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Oh, wait, and there's that other group that I hate.
Right, exactly.
Oh, wait, there's that other group, too.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we would get a lot farther a lot faster if we just, stopped hating little groups. And,
Yes. And just kind of,
Exactly.
okay, let's just, have the laws do what they're supposed to do.
Exactly. Let's just get along. Let's let everybody vote. Let's let everybody have their
Yes.
say. Y'all
it's in the Constitution.
You're all going to corrupt it anyway.
Yeah. Totally.
Exactly. Well, on that angered, spirited note.
I wanted to share. I looked her up.
Oh, yeah,
in
yeah, yeah.
Arlington.
Yes.
She's actually very close to Kennedy. Like
Really?
she's like 20 feet away from Kennedy.
Is
Oh,
she?
wow.
Is he
Also-
Zitkála-Šá and her husband? Oh, wow.
Yeah, I'm guessing it seemed like when we were there that on either side, the tombstones were double-sided.
Yes.
And that the spouses were on either side is what it seemed
okay.
like.
Yeah.
Because we were noticing male names on one side and female names on the other.
Okay. Gotcha.
But also Ruth is right over there too.
Oh, so she's by Ruth and Kennedy.
Yeah.
Oh, look at that. Way to go, Zitkála-Šá. Yay. Little red bird.
Too.
Thanks for finding a light note, Bonnie.
Yay! We can end on a positive note.
I love it. Exactly. Well, I mean,
When did finding somebody's grave become a positive note?
because
Just asking.
you know what? I think because for me, it's because Sister Rosetta Tharpe didn't freaking have one, and the fact of not having a tombstone angered me so much. I'm like,
Yeah.
that's the least you can do is put a stone with somebody's name on it to say that they existed,
Yeah,
and here's where
yeah.
they're. So for me, it's at least her name is on it. She's at Arlington, which means somebody's taking care of it.
Yeah.
I believe it's our money, but somebody's taking
Yeah.
care of it.
Didn't they
And people can see.
Henrietta Lacks or her mother or someone in the family.
They have
The
their-
grave was not upkept and
right.
kinda
It was
lost
on
or
family
something?
property, but I think now it is. It now there's a foundation, so
Yeah.
now it's
Yeah.
better upkept. But I mean, there wasn't money,
Yeah.
and it was tornado country too because the tornado went through a couple of times.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yes, all right. Well, should I wrap us up for season 3?
yeah, gosh.
Oh, so that wraps it up for season 3 of the Gals Guide podcast. It is the last episode of 2021. We will return January 3rd, where we will be talking about revolutionary gals. So that might be of the Revolutionary War, or that just might be a revolutionary gal. So in other words, we're coming back angry in January.
Yep.
What if it's resolutionary, girls?
Yes,
Let's talk
exactly.
about our new resolution.
Our resolutions will be revolutionary. How about
Oh,
that?
yeah.
Woo! So thank you so much for listening. We will see you in 2022. For show notes, links, and images from this week's show, visit galsguide.org. Want exclusive stuff like deleted bits and major bloopers? Become a Gals Guide patron today. Thanks for listening.